Hello. Thank you for finding your way to this dark corner of mine. There are stories that should not be told. There are memories that should be buried in silence, covered by time and dust until they rot and vanish as if they never existed. But fear, it doesn't work that way. It is a kind of acid. It corrodes the veneer of reason, seeps out from the cracks in memory, and drips one cold drop at a time into your soul during the longest nights. The story I'm about to tell is one of those drops of acid. I'm not telling it for entertainment. I'm telling it as a confession, a warning, and perhaps a desperate attempt to push some of this weight off my chest, even though I know it will never truly leave. My name is Thomas Weaver. I used to be an appraiser and restorer of antiques, specializing in early period photography. It was a job that required patience, meticulous care, and a cold, objective eye. I have held daguerreotypes of Civil War soldiers in my hands, the ghostly portraits of Victorian ladies who died of consumption. I've stared into the soulless glass eyes of 1,000 dead people. I thought I was immune to the gloom of the past. I was wrong. It all began on a dreary afternoon in November, when the New England sky unleashed a cold, persistent rain. My workshop, an attic space in Boston's historic district, was submerged in a pale yellow, artificial light. The sound of the rain tapping on the glass pane was like the fingernails of someone scratching to get in. The doorbell rang, a shrill sound that shattered the quiet. The person at the door was a woman I had never seen before. She introduced herself as Mrs. Albright. Her age was difficult to guess. Her hair was as white as snow, but her face was strangely taut, almost without wrinkles like a wax mask. She wore an old-fashioned black suit and a pair of worn leather gloves, even though it wasn't particularly cold. But the thing that sent a shiver down my spine was her eyes. Jet black, deep, and utterly empty. They didn't reflect light, they seemed to absorb it. "Mr. Weaver," she said, her voice as dry as autumn leaves. "I was told you're the best." She placed an ebony wood box on my table, exquisitely carved but old. The box wasn't large, but it felt unusually heavy. "This is a family heirloom, a collection of daguerreotypes. They are very precious. I want you to appraise their value and perhaps restore the ones that are damaged." I opened the box. Inside, lined with faded red velvet, were about a dozen daguerreotypes, each set in a small tarnished brass frame. They were portraits of a family. A man with a thick beard and a stern gaze, a woman with her hair in a high bun and a faint smile frozen by silver chemicals, and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, dressed in stiff clothing, staring directly into the lens with the unnerving seriousness of 19th century children. "The Blackwood family," Mrs. Albright whispered as if she could read my thoughts. "My ancestors, the founders of the town of Blackwood Creek in Maine." I picked one up. It was the family portrait. The quality was excellent, the details astonishingly sharp. I could clearly see every thread of lace on the woman's collar, every grain of wood on the chair they sat on. But then, I noticed something strange. In the far corner of the photograph, behind the man, there was something. A dark smudge. It didn't look like an exposure error or a chemical stain. It had a shape, an indistinct shape, like a tall, thin human figure standing in the shadows of the room. It was almost invisible. You wouldn't notice it if you didn't look closely. Just a technical flaw, I told myself. Early photography was full of imperfections. I examined the other plates. It was the same for all of them. In every portrait, whether of an individual or the group, that shadow appeared. Sometimes it was far away, lurking in a corner. Sometimes it was a little closer, a part of it seeming to merge with the shadow of the furniture. It was always there. An uninvited guest, a silent presence in every frozen moment of the Blackwood family. "I'll take the job," I said to Mrs. Albright, trying to hide my mixture of curiosity and unease. "It will take about a week. I'll call you when the appraisal is ready." She nodded without a word. Her black eyes bored into me one last time before she turned and vanished into the rain. The chill from her gaze seemed to linger in the air long after the damp smell of her coat had faded. That night I began my work. Under the glow of my specialized lamp, the faces of the Blackwood family emerged, eerily alive on the polished metal surface. I cleaned them carefully, restoring details that time had faded. And the more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. That shadow, it wasn't just a shadow, it seemed intentional, as if it were trying not to be seen, but at the same time wanted its presence to be known. In one photograph of the youngest daughter, a little girl of about 5 with long braids, the shadow seemed to be standing right behind her, so close I felt that if it reached out, it could touch her shoulder. And the little girl's face, though trying to be calm, held a flicker of undisguised fear in her eyes. I pushed the thoughts away. It was my imagination, the empty attic, the steady drumming of the rain, and the ghostly faces from the past. A perfect combination to conjure illusions. I decided to go to bed, but sleep would not come. I lay in bed tossing and turning, the images of the photographs churning in my mind. I had the feeling that I wasn't alone, a familiar feeling, the one you get when you know someone is in the room, even when you can't see or hear them, a shift in the air pressure, an unusual chill seeping under the door. I opened my eyes, staring into the darkness of my bedroom. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. It was so thick I could feel it on my skin, like an invisible spider's web. The next day I returned to my work with a sense of fatigue and irritation. I decided I would finish this job quickly and return those damned photographs to Mrs. Albright. I laid them all out on a large table, arranging them in what I guessed was chronological order. And then I froze. Something had changed. I was 100% certain that something had changed. In the family portrait, the shadow, it had moved. Last night, it was standing behind the father. This morning, it seemed to have taken a step to the right, a little closer to the mother. Its shape was also slightly clearer, though still just a blurry black mass. Impossible. I rubbed my eyes. It had to be the light, or maybe I was just too tired. I took a high-resolution digital photo of the plate for comparison. Then I continued my work, trying to ignore the trembling in my hands. But I couldn't ignore it. I checked the other plates. It was the same for all of them. The shadow had moved in all of them. It was getting closer. In the portrait of the youngest daughter, the shadow now appeared to be placing a hand on her shoulder, a long, thin, black hand. And the expression on the little girl's face, dear God, her expression. It was no longer a fleeting fear, it was absolute terror. Her mouth was slightly open as if to scream, but no sound could escape, only the century-long silence of the photograph. Panic began to rise in me. This wasn't a technical flaw. This wasn't my imagination. Something was fundamentally wrong. Something was violating the laws of physics and reality right there on my workbench. These photographs were not static objects. They were alive. Or worse, they were a prison containing something horrific. I rushed to the phone, dialing Mrs. Albright's number. No one answered, just the hopeless sound of the ringing. I tried again and again, but the result was the same. I had to get these things back. I couldn't keep them in my home for another second. That night, I didn't dare to sleep. I locked the door to my workshop, but I knew it was useless. The evil in those photographs wasn't going to be stopped by a wooden door. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, clutching a cup of cold coffee. From time to time I heard strange sounds, a whisper from the workshop, as faint as wind through a keyhole, a light scratching on the wooden floor. I told myself it was just the old house, the water pipes, a mouse in the attic. But deep down I knew the truth. The next morning, with dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep, I made a reckless decision. I would go to Blackwood Creek. I had to find Mrs. Albright, return this box, and forget it ever existed. I looked up her address online, the Albright Manor on the edge of town, a name that sounded grand, but the pictures I found told a different story. It was a dilapidated, rotting Gothic revival house, overgrown with vegetation, looking like something out of an Edgar Allan Poe story. The journey to Maine was like a trip into hell. The sky remained a leaden gray. The further north I drove, the more desolate and isolated the landscape became. Dense pine forests hemmed in the road, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Blackwood Creek was a small, dreary town, old wooden houses, their paint peeling like diseased skin. The locals looked at me with cold, suspicious eyes. There was no friendliness here, only silence and suspicion. I asked for directions to the Albright Manor at the town's only gas station. The old man behind the counter stared at me for a long moment. "You looking for old lady Albright?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Nobody goes up there. That place is cursed." "Cursed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Aye," he said, lowering his voice. "The curse of the Blackwood family. They say something followed them here from the old world. Something that lives in the shadows, something that feeds on souls. They call it the Silent Companion. It's said that it latches onto a person and it never lets go until it takes their face." He shuddered. "Just old talk, of course, but I wouldn't go near that place if I were you." Ignoring his warning, I drove out of town. The road to the Albright Manor grew narrower, eventually turning into a muddy track. The house appeared from behind a row of withered trees, a great black skeleton against the grey sky. It was even more decrepit than in the pictures. The broken windows were like empty eye sockets. The rusted iron gate was slightly ajar, a ghostly invitation. I got out of the car, still clutching the ebony box. The air here was thick and heavy, carrying the smell of damp earth and decay. The silence was absolute. No birdsong, no insects, only the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. The main door was unlocked. I pushed it gently and it opened with a horrifying creak, like the groan of a dying man. Inside was a dark hall, dust motes dancing in the faint beams of light filtering through holes in the roof. Cobwebs hung everywhere like funeral veils. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for a narrow path on the floor, leading deeper inside. Someone's footprints, Mrs. Albright's footprints. "Mrs. Albright," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the empty space. "It's me, Thomas Weaver. I've brought back your things." There was no answer, only silence. I followed the dusty path, my heart threatening to leap out of my chest. The path led to a large room, probably once the drawing room. In the middle of the room was a table, and on it, dozens, perhaps hundreds of photographs were laid out. Not just daguerreotypes, but more modern photos too. Snapshots, Polaroids, digitally printed photos. All of them were portraits of strangers, and also pictures of Mrs. Albright herself. And in all of them, without exception, the shadow was present. The Silent Companion. It was there in a photo of a man from the 1950s leaning against a car. It was there in a photo of a hippie girl from the 1970s sitting on the grass. It was there in a Polaroid of Mrs. Albright herself, taken years ago, when her face still had natural wrinkles. In each photograph, it was in a different position. But there was a pattern. The closer the photograph's date was to the present, the closer it stood to the subject, and the clearer its form became. It wasn't a shadow, it was an entity, a predatory entity, and the camera, somehow, could capture its presence. I stumbled back, trembling. I had to get out of here. But then, my eyes caught sight of another room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, and a weak light spilled out. A morbid curiosity compelled me towards it. It was a bedroom, and on the old bed under a filthy blanket lay a human figure. "Mrs. Albright," I whispered. I slowly approached. A foul stench hit my nostrils, a sweet smell of rot. I reached out, and with horrifying hesitation I pulled back the blanket. I will never forget what I saw. It will haunt me until the day I die. The person on the bed was indeed Mrs. Albright. But her face was gone. It wasn't attacked or mutilated, it was simply no longer there. In its place was a smooth, flat surface of skin, with no eyes, no nose, no mouth, like an unfinished mannequin, a terrible void where a person used to be. The words of the man at the gas station echoed in my head, "until it takes their face." I screamed, a silent scream of absolute horror. I turned, stumbled, and bolted out of that room, out of that house. I didn't care about the box anymore. I just wanted to run. But as I ran through the great hall, I tripped on something on the floor. I fell hard. When I pushed myself up, I saw it was a photograph. A single daguerreotype lying face down on the floor outside the ebony box I had dropped. Shaking, I picked it up. This plate was different from the others. It wasn't a portrait of the Blackwood family. It was taken in an attic room with brick walls and large windows, my workshop. And in the photo was a man sitting at a workbench, his back to the camera. I recognized the sweater I had worn yesterday. It was me. An icy chill shot down my spine. Who took this picture? When? And then the true horror hit me, a dark tsunami that drowned all my reason. I looked closer at the photograph. Behind my silhouette in the darkness of the room, there was something. A tall, thin, black shape. The silent companion. And this time it was no longer lurking, it was standing right behind me. One of its bony hands was resting on my shoulder, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew with absolute certainty that it was staring directly at me. I screamed. This time it was a real scream, tearing through the silence of the haunted house. I threw the photograph away as if it were burning hot and scrambled out the door, running for my life toward my car, not daring to look back. I drove out of Blackwood Creek like a madman. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of Boston. The police didn't believe my story. They found Mrs. Albright's body. The official report stated she died of self-asphyxiation, and the injuries to her face were caused by post-mortem scavenging by animals. They concluded I was in shock and delusional. The box and the photographs were gone. Maybe the police confiscated them as evidence, or maybe someone or something took them back. I don't want to know, but the story isn't over. It will never be over. The curse wasn't in the photographs. The photographs were just a window. The curse it attaches to people. It had followed the Blackwood family for generations. And now it has attached to me. I've given up my work. I can't look at old photographs anymore. In fact, I can't look at any photograph. I sold that attic apartment. I live in a small room now. No mirrors, no reflective surfaces, because sometimes when I accidentally glance at a dark window pane or look down at a puddle in the street, I see it. Just for a moment, a tall, thin shadow at the edge of my vision. A figure standing right behind me. I don't know what it wants. I don't know when it will decide that its time of waiting is over. I only know that it's there. Always there. My silent companion. Waiting. And that's why I'm telling this story, as a warning. If one day you find an old photograph, a face from the past staring out at you, be careful what lurks in the shadows behind them. Don't look too closely. Don't try to understand, just burn it. Because there are some things that, once seen, can never be unseen. And if you sometimes get the feeling you're being watched, if you feel a sudden chill even though the doors are closed, maybe it's not your imagination. Maybe the silent companion has found someone new, or maybe it's just checking on you to see if you're interesting enough to follow. Now, if you'll excuse me, I feel cold, and the shadows in the corner of this room, they seem to be growing darker. It's here, right now, listening, along with you.